Welcome to Leading Minds Revealed, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on how today's top leaders harness the power of mindfulness to conquer the fast-paced, ever-changing world of business. In each episode, we sit down with C-suite executives and leaders who share their strategies for navigating rapid change with skill and clarity. Join us as we uncover the transformative mindsets that drive extraordinary leadership. These insights aren't found in business books, and they'll revolutionize the way you lead. And now, here's your host, Michael Apollo.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Leading Minds Revealed. In this episode, we're exploring how values can guide leadership through real complexity, and how inner alignment, resilience, and mindful presence can shape not only the outcomes of projects, but also entire corporate cultures. My guest today brings a powerful, grounded perspective shaped by decades in the construction industry, starting as a carpenter and rising to become Vice President of Health, Safety, Environmental, and Corporate Social Responsibility at Colas USA. She's a trailblazer in reshaping how we view safety culture, integrating authentic leadership principles, and prioritizing real human connection on the job site and in the boardroom. Please welcome to the show, Victoria Hoyt. Welcome, Dr. Victoria Hoyt. How are you?
Great. How are you doing, Michael?
Great. So lovely to have you here. And your journey is quite remarkable. We've had some time to connect before this call. And what I was struck by is just the amount of care that you bring into this position that you're in and the impact that you're creating as a leader in your organization, the people that you support. And I really want to dive into what sort of drives you and specifically your values. So I know that you've led transformative change by focusing on something that doesn't always get center stage in these corporate settings, and which is values. And so I'd like to start with this question. And so how do values, from your perspective, influence leadership? And what changes when a leader truly lives their values?
That is a good question. I think for me personally, what drives me is I've always had truth is a very big value to me, and passion. I don't believe in doing anything you're not passionate about. That keeps me going. But really, the whole study of authentic leadership is about being value centered, right? In everything that you do and creating your own lens of your core values. And I think when you lead through your own personal core values, and you can align with a company's core values, you're pretty much unstoppable. And you're not going to have a lot of conflict in your own personal life. You'll be aligned with your own values, and that's where we get into conflict. I have to travel a lot. I enjoy travel. It's one of my values. If it wasn't, it would be really difficult to do this job. So I think being aware, that's the cornerstone of authentic leadership, is being self-aware of your core values. So that's really a key trait, I guess you could say, is to be self-aware.
You mentioned how alignment plays such an important role in what we do. And what does that look like when a leader is aligned and when they're not? And how does that sort of ripple out into an organization? Yeah. And I think especially right now, when there's just so much changing, there's so much sort of uncertainty and instability. What role does that alignment have in today's environment?
That's really, I can answer that a lot of different ways. Again, I can speak from personal experience. I am not someone who normally would go for a corporate job because I've always felt like corporations have layers and layers of inefficiency in people sometimes. And sometimes there's people that get into a corporation and just get really comfortable with their position. And so I resisted ever really climbing any kind of corporate ladder. And it was really the person that I work for, the CEO of Colas. We had a couple of lunches. I wanted to hire him. I wanted him to hire me as a consultant. He's like, no, consultants, you need to be in the company. And it was a really tough thing. It was like how to lose a job in 10 days. I was like, no, I hate corporate people. I don't want to be in a corporation. He goes, just meet my team. And he had picked a team of people that were so aligned in the same values of truth and passion for what we were doing. And most importantly, the people that we were serving. There was a servant leadership that came through in all of the top executives. He said, if you just meet my team and you tell me no, then I'll take no for an answer. And so he did. He flew me around the country. I met everybody and I was like blown away. That was true alignment with everyone was in line with the values. Now, we don't agree very often. We have great board meetings that are, we, as Brene Brown says, we like to rumble. We discuss a lot of difficult things, but because we have the same values, we're cohesive. And in the end, we come out with synergistic ideas that are better than anyone could have come up with on their own. That's what I think it looks like ultimately when your values are aligned.
And so in today's day of like uncertainty, when there's just so much change happening, how can that help? How can there's this element of having the like good conflicts, right? Or the ability to challenge questions. Psychological safety is something that comes up too, right? Is to feel comfortable enough in the position that you're in to say things that maybe are disagreeable by others, right? And yeah, I'm interested like that there's this sort of alignment across values, that ability to have those challenging conversation. Does it help promote that? Does it give that sense of security that, hey, you know what, even though we can disagree with each other, we can still get through this because we're aligned in some way? Yeah, I'm interested to really think about that, because I think right now what I'm noticing with a lot of leaders we work with is that this is a time that feels just more uncertain, more turbulent than ever before.
Yeah, and I think you said being comfortable. I think it's being comfortable with being uncomfortable and knowing you might have to walk away. Seriously, that's how I've approached every job I've had since I was pretty young. That when you're really living your values, you don't compromise the values. You can compromise on issues, you can see someone else's point of view. And especially if we talk about authentic leadership, it's having the ability to have someone present evidence to you that's in conflict to what you think you believe. And let the evidence, if you believe in truth, you're going to let the evidence win. And that's something I wish that everybody would really cling to as a value, is truth and integrity, because it helps see through the noise of especially the way social media is. And even everyone has all these different points of view, but how much of their point of view is based on evidence-based reality? We're living in this virtual reality world now. And so you could feel very unstable if you don't have solid values that see you through decisions you make, conversations you have, and then the openness to be able to change your point of view if the evidence presents itself. And that takes courage more than comfort to me.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing there is that values can also, they could provide us alignment, but they also can provide us grounding, because even when everything is changing, we can know that there are these truths that within us that we can return to, even when everything's changing and there's just so much uncertainty, and that can help us feel more grounded, more stable throughout so much that's going on in our lives. And there's a couple of things I want to explore around that in a tiny bit, and specifically around the evidence-based portion of it, right? Because there's this awareness that you're saying that it's this authentic leadership, but also I think where our values come from a space. It starts with awareness, and so I want to explore that a little bit, because I know that's a deep part of this authentic leadership research that you've done and the work that you're doing at Colos, and when you want to expand that even beyond. But maybe could you share a moment where maybe living your values significantly changed the course of a project, or maybe like a leadership decision that you've done? I know that you've worked on shifting safety culture. There's workshops, the work that you've done in Alaska. And are there any of these moments that where living your values have really played a pivotal role in your life?
Yeah, in my role at this company over the last few years, especially in the beginning when people were getting to know me, I'm a bit of a maverick when it comes to safety. People were used to this. Everyone subscribes to being safe, right? The corporate level espouses safety as a core value. Workers want to be safe. They want to go home to their families. Everyone wants to be safe. But as the safety industry has developed over the last 20 years, it's gotten a little comfortable in this role of being this outside thing, this monitor of what's going on, kind of police like, and that was what I walked into. They were used to that type of role. And in my opinion, safety has to be completely integrated into production. It has to be, you really have to listen to the workers on the ground. And it was very top down. These are the rules. You break the rules, you're out. And so getting everyone to really see that the way we were measuring safety was wrong. We were measuring the outcome. We were measuring, oh, if there's no incident, we must be safe. I was asking them, how do you know it's not luck? Because you guys are focused on reacting to the outcome. So we have made a shift in these last 3 years and they used to fire people. So the last person to touch the thing that had the problem is a person who gets fired, and then everybody felt good about it. Okay, we took care of it, which it wasn't the truth at all. So to really get to the evidence, we had to really strip our skin off and say, okay, we're going to really look at what happened here in the context of the whole thing. And sometimes the incidents go all the way back to maybe a policy that we made at the corporate office, and take responsibility all the way along the track and let that bottom frontline worker who actually got caught up in the mess be a part of the problem solving. So that was a huge shift for us. And I think we're ahead of a lot of companies where we're at right now, with all of the presidents of our different companies buying into this methodology and really wanting to know the truth, not firing people. In fact, since we've implemented this program that I've had to really fight hard to get in, I don't think we've fired anyone who was in an incident. And our incident rate, I tell them, don't look at the scoreboard. We're going to look at that down the road. What we're looking at is our daily behaviors and how we're treating people when things do go wrong. And our incident rate by themselves are going really close to zero. It's crazy, but that's what happens when you're focused on the behavior ahead of time and the conditions that we put our people in.
Yeah, so it's, in the industry that you're in, and I know with maybe just if you could share just a bit of the perspective, the size and the scope of these projects. I know, no, just briefly, like, these are billion-dollar projects, right? And what is it, maybe just if you could share just a bit of a perspective on the degree and the scale of some of the construction projects that you've been involved with and that Colas is involved with.
Yeah, in my personal experience, I've been in the large project arena. Now, Colas USA is focused more on roads and bridges of a small, we take them in bite-sized pieces. But in the background that I have, where I did my research for the PhD and where I worked as a carpenter, were large projects. $1 billion toll road project in Southern California, the Hawaii rail project, 850 million, that size of project. Large scale that are done in a short amount of time. So really heavy risk financially and safety. So that's the background I come from.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because a lot of leaders that have just in general working within a number of organizations and different teams, a lot of people, including myself, it can feel really hard to shift a culture and a certain way of thinking. And it's interesting because these rigid mindsets, they arise as a way of protecting what we think needs to be protected, what we think is right. And it's really interesting, even when it may not be right, even when there may be a more effective way of approaching things, a more safe way of approaching things. And so what I was hearing from you is, by coming in with this underlying value of really uncovering the truth of what's happening, maintaining that responsibility for every member of your team, and just staying really vigilant on that, but also having the leadership support. Like there has to be, it's not just one person embracing their values. This is like creating a team dynamic where people, or the whole executive team and beyond, understands what it means to be connected, that you can come in and actually shift and change the way things are going for the better in the organization. And is that sort of
I think that's a great, yeah, because I think we've applied it to our safety culture, but it could be applied to any aspect of an organizational culture, right? It's the same methodology, right? It's listening to the people who do the work, giving them a place at the table, really. And yeah, you do have to have an executive team who's okay with that because it's more of a servant leader model where you're there to serve the people who are getting the work done. And it just changes their stat that people are willing to speak up when you're in that environment. And it was really tough to get it to change. We had to do a couple of these root cause analysis that were very high profile. And a lot of the leaders had to speak up and say, we really mean this. No one's getting fired over this. And we've uncovered some great stuff that have changed things operationally, not just safety. We've realized there was some waste or there was other things going on in addition to being a high risk safety problem that no one was really noticing because we just got to get the work done. Construction is very driven, production driven, which we don't want to change that. And when I came in, I felt like safety felt, oh, they're all they care about is production. And I probably was the first safety person to say, yeah, that's okay. That's how we make money. So just two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah, and I could see the value of a bit of that research-based approach where it's saying, hey, how can we uncover information here and use that information to guide our next steps forward? And I know how frustrating it can be for organizations, people who just want to produce and move things forward because it could feel like there's a bit of a slowing down to have to go through that. But there's an incredible story to say, wow, this could save lives, right? And I think here it's a very what you're involved in it's very life or death, and I think it's very real. I know it's very real for you. And I'm interested talking about a bit of that research. And I know that in some of in your recent studies and research, you've written about authentic leadership, and you did quite an intense dive into this. What sparked this interest? Like, why authentic leadership? Why was that something that interested you, and what took you in that direction?
I have to say, when I started my career, I was really young and I was a carpenter just trying to make a buck. It was good money. And it was very dangerous. It was in the early 80s. That's how old I am. And I joined the union. I was building bridges and we didn't have any safety was not in the vocabulary on the job. But there were leaders who cared about you. And usually the superintendents were the top leaders in those days. And you knew they cared about you, even though you were risking your lives for them. And there was leaders you would follow and leaders you'd rather not work for. So I recognized that early. And as I grew up in the industry, I have four brothers. They all became superintendents, all different personality styles, great leaders in their own rights. And I thought superintendents are really the key to success on construction projects. That was just in my mind, right? But as time went on, construction became a very big corporate entity, right? It went from small mom and pops to these large joint ventures, these billion-dollar projects where banks were running the show. And that's where construction became layered with corporate garbage, right? And so I realized that all of this training and leadership development was going to the top folks, the bankers and the bean counters, right? And so the superintendents were being left behind, where early in my career, I noticed that owners came straight to them to talk about things on the job and that they were getting just dismissed. And at the same time, being asked to do all these new safety and environmental regulations and all this new pressure being put on them. And so I thought, wow, why aren't we putting some of this leadership, executive coaching into that middle to that superintendent level? And that's what inspired me to really want to develop this authentic leadership workshop is what I did, measuring the culture through surveys and then bringing those superintendents or middle managers together and basically just sharing with them everything I learned in all of my research in just a shotgun approach and saying, hey, you got to be self-aware. You're not aware that when you're coming out on the job and steam's coming out of your ears, that your people are shutting down, that kind of thing. So I just was really interested in bringing what I had learned about leadership to these people who were completely cut off from that type of education. They got into the trades early and they work and work. And we talk about what they do for stress relief and all of that. So it was really important to me to bring some value to those folks that have been marginalized in a way, even though they're probably the most important person on the job in terms of safety and culture, and they set the tone. And I think it can be applied across any organization. You have a bunch of middle managers who sometimes we forget how important their role is in setting the tone.
And so what is the biggest takeaways that for these middle managers from really working on their leadership, on their development, on that self-growth? What what are you finding the biggest gains that they're having? And then maybe I would love for you just to share, like, how did you know when you were working on these projects, who were the good ones, like those who are the good leaders, and then those who were the ones that you didn't want to follow because, the stakes were high. How did you know? What was it that sort of that gave you, what was it, a felt sense? Was it an understanding? Yeah, so both of those. So maybe, yeah, if you could share, I'd love to gain your perspective. Like how did others know, hey, these are the people you want to stay away with. These are the ones that are good, the solid leaders to trust. And then also, yeah, on the other side too, on the leadership development, what are the biggest takeaways from developing themselves?
The first question is interesting because I'm a natural observer. I grew up in a family with 8 kids, right? And I'm on the lower end. So I was what you would consider the invisible child, just watching everything that went on. So on the jobs, I remember seeing there was like two kinds, some of the leaders, they might have been like those old John Wayne types, right? They're silent and grumpy, but somehow you could tell they cared. Sometimes they would even yell at you and you would think, oh, wow, they must care about me because they're giving me the time of day. But there was a caring in them that I could notice. And that authenticity they had integrity. They would share information. They would actually listen to you. And so I could, you get this sense of, yeah, this person cares about me from the way they behaved, even if it was someone of few words. On the other hand, I noticed there was this other type of leader emerging throughout my career, and they're still out there today. And it's the BSers. They talked like a silver-tongued serpent, right? They took all the credit for their crews. They blamed people. I just have a really strong BS meter. And I could just tell that's not someone I would trust. And I think it comes down to trust. And I started to realize it had nothing to do with personality. It had to do with these traits. And I wanted to discover what those traits were really. And that drove me to stumble onto authentic leadership because there's just 4 traits that any personality can have.
And so maybe, so it's interesting. There's a lot of emerging research around the value of compassion in leadership, right? And there's this sort of progression, the sympathy, empathy, compassion, the moving from a feeling with to a feeling for a person. And that's where compassion really kicks in. And it's on the other side too, there's so much stress that people are enduring right now. I know those individuals who are people leaders, there's tremendous pressures because over 80% of the time, most of the day is spent taking all the difficulty on, dealing with all the challenges that are emerging. And one of the knee-jerk reactions is to move into self-preservation mode the more stress we get. So it's interesting, the more stressed our environments become, the more we move towards that a self pushing away any responsibility, closing down our communication, moving into sort of talk tracks that just might be rehearsed and may not seem authentic. So I'm interested that from a training perspective, how can, like, what are some of the building blocks? What are some of the insights from training in authentic leadership that perhaps have impacted how you lead? Or have you heard from others in terms of how it can change how they support others in the midst of all these pressures that we're facing? as leaders.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the workshop that I built for the research I did is pretty much the same workshop I still use with our middle management teams. And one of the really cool things that touches on what you were just talking about is a hands-on exercise we do around communication. And we just openly talk. I keep the groups small, they're about 10 people. And we talk about how your communication style changes when you're under pressure. And in our work in construction, pressure is part of the job. There's always schedule pressure, changing dynamics, and all that. So they totally relate to that. But then we do, and different people have done different versions of this, but it's a very structured exercise where you build some blocks. You split people into teams, and one is the builder, one team's a builder. The other team on the other side, they can't see what's going on. They have to communicate to them how to build it exactly the same color, shape, and everything. So what I do in the background is I put extreme pressure on them. I'm saying, okay, I don't give them a lot of information, what they do with their field crews. You say, hey, we got to get this done, and you're going to have 3 minutes to do it. Use all the blocks, hurry up. And I'm walking around going, you got another minute. I'm really putting the pressure on. You can see them agitated and do this, do that, and they're freaking out. So then they never build the same thing. I take the screens away and they go, oh my gosh. Then we find out their communication style under pressure. And it's amazing how spot on it is. Like, I'm a doer. I jump in and do. I'm not very good at saying good morning to people when I come into my office, but it's something you can learn if you want to change that perception of yourself. So even under pressure, you need to learn it. And so we do this quiz. They find out who they are. That's really fun. More importantly, how do you communicate with someone else who's not your type? How do you, like you said, how are you communicating for them and not you? Because they found themselves barking orders, but did they ever look in the eyes of the person across from them and see if they were getting what they were saying? And the answer is usually no. And so a lot of people at the end of the workshop, to answer your other question, when I get to the end, I ask each participant, what was the main kernel you got out of this? They all take different things. There's always a few who take out the communication piece, that they did not realize how that was probably giving the impression they didn't want to, as far as who they really were inside. Because we do a lot of inner self-reflective exercises throughout the workshop. It's only a half day, believe it or not, but we do some pretty big stuff. And we've had tears in that room with big burly construction workers, because we tap into some very personal things that a lot of these folks they didn't get to go to college to write essays and figure out how they feel about things. And so it's really therapeutic. I do pull in a lot of things from group therapy in the workshop as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. There's something around this sort of bedrock of awareness, right? And I think you've mentioned that leadership change starts with self-awareness. And what does that mean? I'm interested. What does it mean from in your perspective for a leader to be self-aware, and why does it start there?
I think you've mentioned it through our conversation about how, as pressures come on, you get in your head, right? And you are doing the self-preservation thing and you're forgetting about the humanity of it all. And I think that if there's not someone there to shake you up and say, what are you doing? You have to be able to put those measures on yourself and say, how am I being perceived? It could start with that. How do I get perceived? And when I share with them how they might be getting perceived as someone coming on the job with steam out of their ears, that's not what they wanted to be perceived at all. Most good leaders want to be perceived as caring, which is important, right? So you have to reflect on, why aren't you being perceived that way? How are you communicating? How are you managing stress? We get into that too. I don't know if you know this, but construction has the highest suicide rate out of any career. A lot of people don't realize that. It's a lot of pressure and it's a lot of lack of resources, and it's not okay to get therapy. There's a lot of cultural underpinnings that a lot of these guys have been left behind. And you got to get self-aware. You got to be able to unpack all that. And we do it in a way, I think part of the beauty of it only being a half day, it was one of the sticking points with the university even letting me do the research. They really didn't want me to do such a short workshop. They didn't think it would work. But with these people who have been self-educated their whole life, I knew it would if I just sprinkled the seeds of what you had to go look at in your own life. So really the workshop is just giving them a blueprint to go reflect some more. And I think it's something we have to do throughout our life. And I think there's a lot of research coming out on self-reflection and how important that is to great leaders.
So, how would you characterize self awareness, like the leadership self awareness? What does that mean to you?
Self-awareness is how do you, it kind of, integrity gets tied up in there too. Do you follow through on, what you say you're going to do? What do you know your values? We do a whole exercise unpacking your own, they develop their own leadership lens. And again, that's another thing. There's usually a couple people in the workshops that say, wow, I wasn't even aware of my values. This makes total sense why I'm conflicted here or why this feels so right. Your values obviously are the core of your self-awareness. If you're not even aware of your own values, then you're starting out lost. So that's probably it, is being aware of your own values and making your decisions and conversations funnel through that. I think of it as I make them boil down. The activity I got from a life coach, and it's a whole list of values, right? Of adjectives that describe things like truth or integrity or whatever. And I make them circle their top 10, and then I make them boil it down to just 5 they can't live without. And then I say, picture that in a circle, and everything that comes out of your mouth, every thought you have or decision you make for yourself goes through that lens. That's step one.
Yeah, what I was hearing is, that this awareness, leadership awareness, is an awareness of how you're showing up with others, awareness of your communication style, how you communicate, how you handle the pressure, being aware of that pressure. And then also, as part of it, the underpinning is this awareness of your values. What drives you? What is it that you can't live without right now, just boiling it down? And it's really interesting in mindfulness, it's synonymous with awareness, right? And a lot of the training is purely on that, like how to develop that awareness in the moment. And one of the things that sort of reminded me of the role of mindfulness, what you shared, is this: you need sometimes somebody to come and shake you up, right? And to just take that time to be self-reflective. And one of the ways we talk about even mindfulness itself is it's a way of remembering to focus on what matters most right now in this moment. And there's this part of it is this continuous, like you always need to be returning to it, right? Because we're going to forget, we're going to get caught up in all the realities, those pressures that are happening all the time. And you mentioned how there's this elegance of having this like short training stint where you're providing this chance for your leaders to dive in and to just reflect and to think about things that aren't normally talked about, yet could be so powerful. How do we, how do you keep that going? How do you support your leaders in continuing that development over time? And is there a place to continuously remind them in some way similar to some of this training that we've been working on?
That's a great question. That's a place I could probably do better. I have been focused on getting them all through it. We do have the opportunity at the end, if they want more coaching, that we will set them up. We have external coaches and other people that can take over in that respect. I've had a few people who've wanted to do that. I usually will do a follow-up a month later, check in with them, and then I'm on the jobs a lot. I travel to the different companies all the time, and so I get the chance to see them at least. It's been probably once or twice a year in each of the different businesses that we have, because they're usually in any meetings that we do when we go to visit. And I'll check in with them casually. There probably should be more follow up, but we've been seeing such a difference in them just getting those little seeds of things to work on their own. They also get provided a workbook that has a lot of the notes already in there, and I give them a whole book reading list of things to follow up with. I think it's been effective in them doing their own self-development, but that's probably an area where I'm going to have to look at what am I going to do once I get them all through it. I'm almost done getting every leader in the whole company. It's the next step.
Yeah, it's like the catalyst, right? It needs everything. It needs, and it's how to. And I'm always thinking about how to reach people in the most effective way possible. And it seems like you've done just a remarkable job of connecting with your leaders that you're working with in a way that meets them where they're at and can
Yeah.
start them on this journey that so many of us, I knew that when I started my own personal development and professional development, emotional intelligence training, and then leadership development, mindfulness training, etc. I had no idea of what I was getting myself into, and I was just experimenting with things, and I had to find it out myself. But it just goes to show how important it is for there to be this focus within organizations to continuously support and foster that learning environment. There's some great work around, I think it was Peter Senge. He did something called explored learning organizations and how to foster that and how these learning organizations last longer than so many other organizations that are out there. And it all comes down to awareness, really. It actually comes out to fostering awareness not only of ourselves, but of others and the systems at play. And I think that's something that's it's fascinating to see the impact that you're bringing. Amazing. So this is, I think we've covered so much here. And what advice would you give to organizations that want to empower this, like the middle managers here, particularly for yourself or in the construction industry, superintendents, if they want to empower this group of their people leaders more effectively, what sort of advice would you give them?
I think mine started with trying to improve the safety culture, but really investing in developing the leadership of these folks, not just getting them technical training, or because I see a lot of the middle gets all the technical training, they get safety OSHA training. And if you don't give them the leadership training, all of that's useless because they're your main communicator. They're communicating up and they're communicating down. Leadership matters the most right there. So investing, even safety folks were saying, what are you doing leadership training for? Your safety. And I go, because that is the number one leading indicator of good safety outcomes is a leader. You can strip a program and all of that away. If the leader's strong enough, it doesn't matter. I just think developing those middle managers, mindfulness training, your organization, I would recommend they start tapping into some of what you guys have to offer. I saw on your website. Mindfulness is the beginning of great leadership.
It's what I hear there is this building a business case is so important because you could view this as being soft and maybe a nice to have, but it's really interesting when you actually start looking at the downstream effects of good leadership. It's with you, I know it's very real in the construction industry. I think you were mentioning something around insurance, and they budget in certain metrics around the potential of like mortality, death inside in projects. And so it's very real, I think, in your industry, but it also it's across all industries. The research is showing that leadership development plays such an important role. And so if you could build that case and then also make it something that's of high level importance and a priority, that's some of the advice that you'd share is secure that as an item that needs to maintain that focus within the organization and just continue to foster that.
Absolutely. And I'm lucky. I wouldn't be here if I didn't have the CEO I had. He pushes it even more than I do. Did you get everybody? We have a scorecard for it now. Who still needs people to get through authentic leadership? And I think that your CEO has to buy into it, but I think you're right. If you can make the case, if you have a CEO and you can bring them that data, there's plenty of data, and you probably have tons of it with the mindfulness as well. It's very similar, right? Authentic leadership begins with that. It pays dividends. And we all know, even from leaders we work for, do you want to work for someone who is interested in your development? There's this thing called discretionary energy that every employee has. Here's the expectation. Discretionary energy is really important to me in safety because focused workers that are into what they're doing, they don't get hurt. They're very mindful, right? So they're focused on what they're doing. They're focused on the objective for the day, which we used to do a safety meeting. I said, no, we're going to do a production meeting. How much do you want to get done in the day? And then talk about the risks of that. But so they have this discretionary energy they start every day with. They're going to either give you more or they're going to give you less. If you're a terrible boss, they're going to be giving you way less while they're shoveling or pounding a hammer or whatever they're doing. They're going to be thinking about where can I get the next job? And they're likely to get hurt and definitely not meet your production goals. But that person who feels cared for and engaged in your vision, you're going to get that discretionary energy. You're not even paying for it. And they're going to be innovative and they're going to be thinking about things. They're going to be mindful. It's really, that's how you give the business case. It's free money.
Oh, wow. I love that. I absolutely love that. I've never thought of it that way, but there's this talk about presenteeism and engagement, but the way that you put it there, that there's this discretionary energy, and how are you impacting that? And how are you impacting people's lives as a leader?
Yeah.
And depending on that, that's just how much or how little people are going to give of themselves, of their lives to be connected with you as an individual, your organization. And that really, if you just, that I think that's going to be a big takeaway that I'm going to have for myself. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I know it's really personal for you too, in terms of how you show up in your life and what drives you. And so what inspired that? Was it the CEO that inspired specifically this sort of journey into leadership? Is there that whole, you went through quite a
Or
trajectory.
metamorphosis.
Yeah.
I have to say, I really love learning too. It wasn't the CEO who inspired it. I've known him through my career. I worked for him early on when I first got out of the field. I was a carpenter when I actually met this CEO. He was a project manager on a large one of those $1 billion road projects, the toll road project in Orange County. And I was working in the field, and that's where I learned about this scientific side of safety, where I was a cost engineer, so I was in a budget meeting taking notes. And the insurance guy said, we're going to budget for 4 fatalities on this job. And I'm thinking, my family's going to be working out there. And so I asked him after the meeting, just very interested in how you came up with that. And he had a calculation based on Heinrich's triangle. A lot of debate on the numbers, but insurance companies use that. So that's what sparked my interest in it. It's this, I like science, but I also like learning. And I thought, gosh, he drew that triangle for me and showed me the calculation and the statistics and probability of fatality happening with that many man hours. And I realized that none of the safety people were teaching in that way. You know, back when the part of the reason I was a carpenter is I couldn't read very well back then. And so I didn't have a lot of options. I kept trying to go to college and I couldn't pass a class. I couldn't read the books. So I, trades were really the only option I had at that point. So I think I bring that into what I'm doing. Just like I showed you, I hear the word, oh, we want engagement from our employees. And I just think, yawn, what does that mean? I don't like buzzwords. That's another one of my anti-safety. They say proactive. What does that mean? What does engagement mean? And so I have to see it. I have to see, okay, discretionary energy is you're going up, down. So I think all of that just ties together in my journey in how this all has come about. It's a combination of, I know we need to meet people. I like how you said that, where they are. And everyone needs to learn in different ways. And to get people all going in the same direction, that alignment, you have to communicate visually. You have to communicate the business case. You've got to communicate in so many different angles to make sure you're meeting everyone where they are to at least get to a starting place. You know what I mean?
All grounded on values, strong values, which I
Yeah.
think, because it could be so complex, but it's interesting, bring it full circle right to what we opened with, was the values are this bedrock that in the midst of so much complexity, so much change, that we can always return to and be grounded in. And that's our sort of place of truth. And I think that's fantastic and fascinating. And I know how interesting and how real it is as well for you, because of how many family members you have in the industry, and to have really talk about just a heart-centered focus on truly keeping people safe. It means everything to you because you know that's directly impacting your family, those who are closest. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to know, so what is, as you continue, you're traveling a lot right now. Here you're in the West Coast, and you go to mid and you go east. You're all over the US and beyond. And so how do you take care of yourself? What keeps you grounded on an ongoing basis? What are some of the leadership practices that you do, or I should say just purely human practices that you do to sustain yourself amidst everything?
That is a great question. I breathe. I practice breathing the proper way. I actually teach that in my workshop, but I also do yoga. I just started running, not much, but I just started. I really enjoy that. And so I really like physical activity. I have a cabin where I do a lot of creative projects. I've been fixing that up for a while now, and I love spending time with my family. My sister has a sailboat. We go sailing. So when I'm not working, I try to really shut it off and unwind and practice what I preach, reflect on how I'm doing, because we all get caught in those traps. So I do try to do a lot of reflection. I'm a pretty spiritual person, so I practice that. I pray. I have a pretty full life. I got great kids and now I have grandkids. So really fulfilled and busy. But I do try to get some downtime where it's just me doing my yoga, and otherwise I'd go completely crazy.
That's it. I think it's so important to balance, for us to be able to, as leaders, to be aware and to lead effectively and even just lead reflectively too. Is It's so important to be able to be fully present in these activities that we do outside of work as well as inside of work. There's this whole talk about there being work-life balance, and now it's more like work-life integration because it's so integrated into so many aspects of our lives. So I think we're finding that's even more important to find that time to focus on these things that really nourish us. And it's also refreshing to remember to do that and for you to share that, I think, with me and all of the listeners. And so for those leaders listening who want to continue and stay connected with you, where can they follow along, or are there any resources you'd like to share? How could listeners stay in touch?
Probably LinkedIn would be the best place. I'm working on a book and a workbook for others to be able to do the workshop. So my dissertation is out there, and I've seen it show up in AI now. I had no claims to it. So it is open source. I really want to share this information, but I'd like to get it out there so others can emulate what I've been doing with the workshops, because it's pretty phenomenal. It's probably going to be a ways out. I'm still probably 8 months away from any final product, but just stay in touch and stay in tune. Let me know, and I'll make sure that you're on the list.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to put that into our podcast description to be able to get in touch with you, Victoria. Thank you so much for this inspiring and insightful conversation, the stories and the strategies that you've shared with us. I know there's a lot that I'm going to take away, and I know that our listeners as well. And so thank you so much again for joining us, Victoria.
It's a pleasure talking to you, Michael.
Amazing. So that brings us to the end of this episode of Leading Minds Revealed. We'll see you on the next one.
Leading Minds Revealed podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.